Welcome everyone, or welcome back to the Oregon Outdoor Recreation Summit. We're glad to have you here for a virtual State of the Outdoors closing session for our 2020 Oregon Outdoor Recreation Summit. I'm Cailin O'Brien-Feeney, the Director of the Oregon Office of Outdoor Recreation and one of the co-organizers of this conference. And before we go any further, I just want to thank Jonathan, Karen, Zavi, our keynote, Jose, Alani, Herbert, Andrew, and Mavis for a really rich and engaging session earlier this afternoon that was recorded, just like this session will be, and will be available at a later date if you didn't catch it. So before we really jump in and I provide some brief opening remarks and introduce our panel for today, a couple other housekeeping notes. So I mentioned that this session will be recorded. It'll be available in about a month. But you're encouraged both to introduce yourself through the chat feature as well as to use the Q&A function through Zoom so that we can be collecting questions that I, as a moderator, will use throughout about a 30-minute Q&A session towards the end of our time here, wrapping up by 5. So let's see, I want to just open with a couple minutes of opening remarks, and then, like I said, I'll introduce our great panel today. So the challenges of 2020 have been huge and varied. I don't have to tell folks here that, but the ones that I've most experienced probably are, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, overwhelming public use of outdoor recreation, with tightened budgets, layoffs, new rules, both to protect public safety and because of limited capacity in certain places, a rising movement for social and racial justice in all facets of society, and of course, a historic wildfire season. So as we gather here in the fall at what is typically the end of a busy summer tourism and recreation season, the focus of today's panel is a bit of a retrospective of presentations about how the organizational leaders responded this year, and a bit of a forward-looking conversation. That's the hope, at least. But before we do dive into that, I wanted to share just a few positive stories that are on my mind today that have emerged, really just evidence of Oregonians loving the outdoors, of our community resilience, and frankly a penchant for collaboration that hopefully will set the tone a little bit for the conversation to come here. So as you likely have heard if you've been in other sessions or simply spent time at your favorite outdoor spot this year, we have seen record interest almost across the board in outdoor recreation in its many forms. Those are higher historic levels of use for much longer during the summer than we typically see, as well as data to back it up, like strong hunting and fishing license sales, RV registrations, and the like. We've seen race and event organizers, ski areas, outfitters, and guides all pivot and modify how they operate to do so successfully and protect public health. And we've also seen outdoor manufacturers, many of them, pivot their manufacturing to really support some of the pressing needs at hand. And one that comes to mind for me, since I've been using one of their face masks recently, is Blackstrap, whose civil face mask, actually the production of that has resulted in them hiring additional folks to bring on board, and they've donated over 60,000 of those face masks across the country. But there's great examples from other places in the state and other brands. There's new learning opportunities coming on board, like through OSU's outdoor school that I just learned about recently. They launched an open source and free offering about how to incorporate indigenous studies concepts into outdoor education programming. Perhaps we'll hear a little bit more about these today, but we've also seen grant programs, new ones and old programs that have shifted to meet the challenges of our time from some of the organizations here, as well as from nonprofits like Oregon Adaptive Sports, Wild Diversity, and a very successful launch of the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund, which you would have seen a little bit about if you were tuned in between our earlier afternoon session and this one. And one of the things that I'm proud of that one of our speakers helped lead is the creation of essentially a comprehensive strategy for outdoor recreation in Oregon, about engagement of underrepresented populations, an economic strategy, sort of path forward, as well as a conservation strategy that was produced by a 33-member group called the Governor's Task Force on the Outdoors. And I can drop a link into that report in the chat if folks haven't seen it. But essentially that group worked for about a year up until when COVID started, and many of those strategies still make sense now or are more needed than ever. And we will see a piece of legislation from Governor Brown implementing many of those recommendations going forward into next year or in 2021. So essentially the question today is, what have we experienced this year? What have you and the audience experienced this year? And how do we learn, grow, and improve from here? So with that, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists who will be sharing their reflections today. We'll hear from each for about 10 minutes. And like I said before, we'll have 30 minutes of audience question and answer at the end. So joining me today in our virtual State of the Outdoors, we have Todd Davidson, Travel Oregon CEO, OPRD, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department Director Lisa Sumption will follow Todd. Michelle Mitchell, who is the Assistant Director for Recreation, Wilderness, Wild and Scenic Rivers, Heritage Trails, and I think that's all for Oregon and Washington with the U.S. Forest Service. And joining us in a little bit will be John Blasher, who's the Director of Metro Parks and Nature, as well as an OPRD Commissioner, and was the chair of the Governor's Task Force on the Outdoors. And so with that as a little bit of an intro, Todd, I'm going to hand it over to you. And like I said, after that, we'll hear from Lisa, Michelle, and John. And as an encouragement to the audience, there's more than 80 of you out there. Please pepper that Q&A box with questions. We'll do as much as we can to get a good conversation going. But for now, Todd, take it away. Thanks.
All right, Cailin, thank you very much. I believe I am sharing my screen now, so we should be good to go. I want to thank you for having me here and for having Travel Oregon as an important part of this kind of this closing plenary session, because as you noted, Cailin, these are challenging times to say the least, and having the opportunity to be able to share an update on what's occurring with the tourism industry that's been impacted by COVID-19, the social justice movement, and a historic wildfire season is paramount to our consideration, especially our strategic considerations as we move forward. You know, if 2020 has taught us anything, is that we have to be nimble and we have to be intentional as we think about how we want to navigate this next normal. So amidst all this adversity, amidst all this loss, we've got to find new ways that we can partner. We have to find new ways to invest our resources and new ways that we're going to be able to restore our infrastructure. So we are going to reprioritize building an Oregon tourism industry that's inclusive and makes all Oregon visitors and Oregonians feel welcome and valued here. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Oregon's travel and tourism industry was literally booming. In fact, 2019 marked the state's 10th consecutive year of growth in travel-related spending. I mean, consider the fact that between 2003 and 2019, visitor spending in Oregon went from $6.5 billion a year to nearly doubling to $12.8 billion a year. But COVID-19 immediately and steeply impacted the small businesses that make up the state's tourism economy. 6 weeks after the pandemic hit, 7 in 10 lodging employees and 8 in 10 food service workers have been laid off or furloughed. Now, there's been brand new research that's just come out on the economic contribution of outdoor recreation in Oregon. Now, this is preliminary data that's still under review, and this is just taking a quick snapshot of what's happening with non-local participants. We would often categorize them as visitors to the state of Oregon, and visitors within the state of Oregon as Oregonians get out and experience their own state. Based on the preliminary results and the preliminary estimates by Earth Economics, in 2019, non-local visitors spent an estimated $7 billion participating in outdoor recreation in Oregon. These non-local visitors account for 60% of all recreation spending in Oregon. And dollars, as we know, such as these, are going to provide that economic development opportunities for communities that are rich in outdoor recreation opportunities to be able to capture. Non-local visitors, we also found through this study, also spend more than their local counterparts. For instance, across all state parks in Oregon, non-local overnight visitors spend 66% more than local overnight visitors. And non-local day visitors spent 165% more than locals did. Now, we do want to keep Oregonians, of course, traveling and vacationing in the great state of Oregon because it does keep the money local, and it prevents rather that economic leakage that we also want to avoid. Now, I mentioned that COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on the travel and tourism industry in Oregon. I mentioned that in 2019, visitor spending reached its 10th consecutive record year of growth, with $12.8 billion being spent. So far for calendar year 2020, based on a moderate scenario, we anticipate that direct travel spending could decline to $4.9 billion, a 62% decline. Now, this forecast is going to be updated later this month and again later this winter to reflect any policy or pandemic changes over the course of the next few months. This chart from STR shows the year-over-year change in average daily rate, revenue per available room, and occupancy statewide and by region, just to give you an idea of how each and every region of the state of Oregon has been impacted with the advancement of COVID-19. Now, in April, Travel Oregon partnered with Business Oregon and the Small Business Development Center networks across the state so we could better understand the impacts of COVID-19 and what it's meant to the business community. We had more than 5,000 businesses that responded to our survey. Nearly 70% of those responses were completed by small businesses, those folks that have fewer than 10 employees. Some of the key takeaways: uncertainty and the inability to plan is the biggest challenge facing Oregon businesses during COVID-19. 40% of Oregon businesses have temporarily closed during COVID-19, while another 2% have permanently closed. It gets even worse in rural counties, with 45% temporarily closed and 3% being permanently closed. 50% of tourism businesses saw their revenue decline by at least 90% or more in April. Now, we know that people that visit Oregon are doing so because of its scenic beauty and the outdoor recreational opportunities. You saw the slide earlier about the economic impact of outdoor recreation in this great state of Oregon. Now, in fact, Oregon and the outdoors really go hand in hand. A study by DHM Research found that U.S. residents rate Oregon highest for natural beauty and access to outdoor recreation. As Oregonians, we already knew this to be true. As a matter of fact, Oregonians value our outdoors so much that 92% of us report participating in some form of outdoor recreation each and every year. This year, Oregon's experienced drastic increases, as Cailin mentioned, in outdoor recreation and in dispersed outdoor activities, as people felt comfortable doing these relatively more socially distanced activities during the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to support safe travel and responsible recreation and business resiliency, Travel Oregon has shifted our work in a number of ways. For example, through our work with the Oregon Outdoor Recreation Initiative that began in 2016, we identified the need to rally around stewardship communications and messaging for the state. We worked with a committee that included the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, the Forest Service, BLM, REI, Oregon State University, and others that led to the development of our statewide Take Care Out There messaging framework. Since March, with the advent of COVID-19, Travel Oregon's been participating in public land manager phone calls that are organized by Cailin and the team at the Oregon Office of Outdoor Recreation to identify challenges that public lands are facing. The needs from Travel Oregon have been focused on clear and direct communication towards consumers in support of the public land needs. This has resulted in a variety of actions. For example, we've further developed the Take Care Out There messaging on consumer channels to include COVID-19 messaging. Therein lies the beaver wearing the mask. Supporting Oregon Parks and Recreation as they reopen state parks in May, and making sure that we were developing a responsible visitor management communication system as Crater Lake and the North Coast especially were experiencing a dramatic increase in the number of visitors to their areas. We know consumers are traveling. So our goal here is to make sure that our marketing approach for the foreseeable future is to help visitors and Oregonians alike have safe trips by being prepared and aware of what the state and county regulations are that are in place to help slow the spread of COVID-19. We also want to make sure that we're really deploying our resources and partnerships to provide content that can provide leadership to the tourism industry and businesses with trainings and engagement. You can find a portal to all of the content for our visitor industry through our visitor industry website, which is industry.traveloregon.com. There's registration for future virtual sessions and opportunities for businesses to be able to request technical assistance as well. All these trainings are also available on Travel Oregon's YouTube channel, as will all the proceedings, as you've likely heard, from this Outdoor Recreation Summit, which we're very proud to be co-leading the production of and serving as a financial sponsor of. Now, Travel Oregon pivoted our newly formed Oregon Trails Fund, which is a brand new partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, so that we could provide investments in state and local trail stewardship organizations and leverage our 7 regional destination management organization partners to support sustaining key trails around Oregon. Consider these kinds of investments. Through the Oregon Trails Coalition and Trail Keepers of Oregon, and in partnership with the Oregon Mountain Biking Coalition, we were able to invest $47,000 in funding for the purchase of PPE and trail tools for over 20 trail stewardship organizations, and to fund training videos to support volunteers that will be participating in trail maintenance and trail ambassador programming. We also made sure these videos were available with Spanish subtitles. We also went through the regional program, working with our regional destination management organizations. We signed MOUs with 6 of the 7 RDMOs for projects totaling $262,000 that are going to go to a variety of projects to help build, improve, sustain, and make more trails accessible throughout Oregon. We're also providing direct assistance to businesses, communities, and other outdoor recreation stewardship programs. In early June, Travel Oregon awarded 122 grants totaling over $800,000 to directly support tourism business operations. Here you get an idea of the awardees broken down by organization type. Here's what's interesting. This application was open for 5 days, only 5 days. And in that time, we received 332 applications for just under $3.5 million. We had 13 business days to move these 332 applications through a grant review process and announce the award funding. 90% of the awarded funds went into those communities, went into rural communities. More than 70% of the funds are dedicated to cover some portion of payroll expenses, something Travel Oregon has historically not done. In the case of the wildfires, our main strength when we have an active crisis, as we've recently gone through, is through our communication channels to both consumers, to Oregonians and visitors, as well as our industry partners. Our messaging strategies allow us to be nimble when unexpected tragedy occurs. During the recent wildfires, we prioritized our public safety with frequently updated travel alerts and social media posts that echoed the needs of our industry partners. For instance, Oregon's Office of Emergency Management asked us to discourage disaster tourism. Yeah, there were actually folks wanting to go out and witness the fires firsthand. Ultimately, our large audience reach was able to amplify critical information, and our Ways to Help story reaffirmed Oregon community pride. We also worked with the Office of Emergency Management through the Emergency Support Function 18 and worked with the team to provide weekly lodging availability lists for those folks that had lost their homes or been forced to evacuate through the Emergency Lodging Assistance Program. Now, looking ahead, when we think about recovery and resiliency, there are probably 3 areas I'd like to touch on real quickly. Number one, we know there's pent-up demand to travel. But we also know consumers are signaling to us a strong desire for what I'm going to call self-preservation. So this opportunity to be socially distanced, this opportunity to be able to have confidence that the travel system, the ecosystem in which we travel, whether it's by air, within our vehicles, staying in hotels, eating out in restaurants, etc., that entire system is safe for them to be able to travel within. So being able to communicate that as an outfitter and guide, as a lodging operator, as a transportation system operator, is going to be imperative to making sure that we're balancing the pent-up demand for travel that consumers have with their strong desire to obviously remain healthy and to slow the spread of COVID-19. I also think there's going to be an opportunity for rewiring travel. We've seen it. We're hearing all about the advancements that are being made in technology. I think thermal scans for the entrance to some of our major venues are probably inevitable. I could see them at airports quite readily. We're hearing about the rapid testing that's able to be done. Bermuda, for example, has recently been able to reopen some of their convention and meeting market by testing people as they're getting onto planes and headed for Bermuda, being tested again when they arrive, and then you transfer to your hotel room and wait there for a couple of hours while you wait for the results of your test, and then you're free to go. And in that way, they've been able to reopen their convention and meeting market. Imagine us being able to roll out something like that throughout the entirety of the travel and tourism industry, along with the advancements that technology, smartphones, and the like will be able to afford us as well. Finally, we all care deeply about this place. And we care deeply about the folks that call this place home and the people that are coming to visit here. Oregon is a large and diverse state. We've got a lot of communities that call it home. And we want every Oregonian and every visitor to our state to feel welcome and safe and valued as they enjoy all that our state has to offer. This commitment cannot be part of just some initiative, but it has to be ingrained in our work every single day as we all help grow Oregon's tourism economy. This is why we're committed to ensuring that our work tells the story of all Oregonians and that all who travel the state can enjoy their journey and can feel welcome. Because, my friends, the only way we'll ever really be able to see each other will be when we really begin to resolve these differences. So this commitment comes across in our work in just a few ways. First of all, we're committed to growing the coverage and representation of women, people of color, LGBTQ people, and people with disabilities. And second, because representation matters, we're also intentional in seeking out storytellers and sources that have diverse backgrounds and perspectives so that we're allowing Oregon communities to tell their own stories as well. We know our work is never going to be done in this place, and that it's critical to be able to be authentic in making diversity and equity a foundational principle of our mission that we all have to engage in and amplify as we amplify the voices of all Oregonians through our content, through our marketing, and through our digital platforms. The COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for everyone in our state and across our nation. Additionally, the momentum of the movement against racial injustice and the recent wildfires have exposed more vulnerabilities and the need for further improvement in Oregon's tourism economy. As we begin to rebuild the industry, Oregonians can and must come together to reopen in a smart way that supports the stabilization and growth of Oregon businesses that employ and support local families and communities first. Together, we're going to get through this. It's going to be different. Nothing's going to go back to exactly the way that it was before. We'll be smarter, we'll be more strategic, and we'll look for new ways to partner and support all the industries in this recovery together. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you today.
To Lisa.
Awesome. Okay, Cailin, you're muted. So I think you handed it off.
Yep, we have a couple of folks trying to talk right now. Yes. Yeah, thank you, Todd, and you're up, Lisa.
Awesome. That was great, Todd. Thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you. And I know it sounds repetitive, but this is one of those back to basics years. And I think that what COVID has taught us this year is the value of partnership and our relationships together, and just our ability to come together to navigate not only COVID, the most civil unrest our country has ever been in, the financial issues we have had, and then wildfires on top of that, and we're only in October. So I do appreciate all the partnerships. I am going to go ahead and share a little bit of information here with you guys. I thought it might be helpful because we think people always know what we've all endured, but I think it would be it would be helpful for you all to see kind of what your state park system has endured here over the last few months. So we started learning about COVID back in February, put together a plan early February, March, and started talking about things like maybe we'll close down camping and do some limited day use. And if you will all remember that fateful spring break weekend where we had 9 cities and 5 counties come together on a Saturday on the North Coast and take public action to close their communities to people who didn't live there, which meant we were closing down our entire state park system. And if you think about Fort Stevens, for example, I think had 5,000 campers in that park, which is about double the size of the city of Warrenton. And so we successfully got everyone out of their communities within 48 hours. And as we closed the gates, had this moment of, oh no, how long, right? When we usually handle some kind of crisis, we have a finish line or we're ready to recover as Oregonians. And we really didn't know how long this would be and how long things would continue to go on. Keeping things closed wasn't super easy. You know, as park folks, we like to have people in our parks. We're not used to trying to keep people out of our parks. And as you can imagine, with COVID and all the things you couldn't do, everyone wanted to get outside. At the same time, all of the bars and restaurants closed. And it's kind of important for folks to realize that our state parks here in Oregon received 0 general fund dollars. We're about half and half. Half of our fees, our revenue comes in from our user fees. So that would be our day use and our overnight camping. And then the other primary half is from constitutionally dedicated lottery funds. And so with bars and restaurants being closed and parks being closed, that had some pretty significant impacts on us financially. Todd's team, kudos and my sympathy out to you as well, because many of us suffered some layoffs and some pretty significant financial reductions. So we didn't return 371 of our seasonal staff to help us when we were able to reopen. We also laid off 47 permanent positions that support the state park system, because we ended up in about a $22 million shortfall during that 13-week window that we were closed. So that meant not every one of our parks opened back up. And at the same time, while we were closed, we were partnering. Huge shout out to the work that Cailin and the task force have done over the last year, because those relationships were solid and strong. So when the crisis hit, we were able to coordinate. Cailin was meeting with folks weekly and coordinating with all of our recreation providers to figure out how and when we could safely reopen and consistently reopen, to make sure that our staff were going to be safe, our communities were going to be safe, and figure out things like PPE and how do we manage through things like COVID. How do you clean a restroom? How do you keep people physically distanced? And so partnering with Travel Oregon and all of our other recreation and community partners was just was unbelievable to watch how incredible everybody came together. So we came up with a prepared care and started welcoming folks back with masks and plexiglass and physical distancing, and just trying to help kind of educate everybody along the way. And as we opened, we, as has already been mentioned, we were busier than we've ever been. We had lots of congestion issues, lots of garbage issues, just stuff that you all probably are fully aware of, but just kind of going back and capturing that and talking about it is pretty incredible. So I also appreciate the partnerships as we reopened and having different conversations with our community partners on how do we deal with the congestion, how do we make sure that it's safe for people to cross highways like 101 with their families and strollers and pets, to make sure that everyone had a safe experience. This is just a really quick look at our budget reductions. We experienced about a $22 million shortfall, as I had mentioned, with the lottery funds and our park user funds basically having the financial faucet shut off for a 13-week window caused a pretty significant reduction. But I am happy to report that the lottery funds are up, and our park user fees, although they were still down, we were as busy as we possibly could be. And I do hope that if things can stay steady here, that we'll be able to recover this in a year or two here and try to get back to, I heard Todd say the word normal. I am encouraged to hear that word, but whatever that might be. So we just had gotten to the point that we thought we were almost done with season, and ready to try to figure out how we were going to get through the winter and be ready for spring and figure out how we could ramp back up. And then the fires hit, and we had about 24 of our properties hit pretty significantly. Collier Memorial State Park is probably the biggest damage area. Just Detroit Lake State Recreation Area was second. The park itself is more intact. The community, complete devastation. And so we look forward to helping figure out how we're going to start rebuilding up there in the Santiam Canyon with all of our partners. Silver Falls, remarkably, it was about 125 acres and it was in the backcountry side. And most visitors will probably never know that we experienced that fire there, but boy, it was a scary few weeks trying to figure out whether or not we were going to lose yet one more of our gems. So I'm trying to think of what else might be important. Cailin's going to cover all the really good questions, and I look more forward to the dialogue than taking up time going through this, but I just thought I'd recap a little bit about what was going on in the state park system over the last couple of months, so you have a better understanding of what our world looked like and what that meant. And Cailin, I'm going to turn back over to you. Thank you guys for having us. Thank you for doing this virtually. Again, another odd and interesting thing, but I love that we're all together and that there's so many of you participating, even if it is a little weird and clunky. We just love being together with you in this space. So thanks, Cailin. I'm going to pass it back over.
Thanks, Lisa. Just really helpful grounding information that probably backs up what some folks felt on the ground this year. And I know similar themes to what we all heard from local and county park managers, from other state agencies and from federal agencies. And so to share a little bit more context from one of those federal partners, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Mitchell from the U.S. Forest Service Region 6, like I mentioned, to walk through what was happening on our national forests this summer. So go ahead, Michelle, thanks.
Hey, thanks, Cailin, and thank you for inviting the Forest Service to participate in this really important forum. We are very honored to be here with the other panelists and with you and with those of you participating and listening on the other end. And kudos to all who were involved in pivoting the Outdoor Summit to this virtual space where we are still able to get together and to share important things and work in collaboration. So thanks everyone who had a hand in that. Want to just give you guys a very quick bit of background into the U.S. Forest Service. Cailin mentioned that we are the Region 6, the Pacific Northwest of the Forest Service, and Pacific Northwest region of the Forest Service. And of course, that's Oregon and Washington. Here today, we're focused on Oregon. And boy, there are some really amazing National Forest System lands, a grassland, a monument, a scenic area. And I have to say that I realize the imperfection of what I'm about to share with you, given the history of the First Peoples and the legacy for time immemorial that they have here on the land. And yet I'm still really proud that these are your public lands, that these lands belong not to the U.S. Forest Service, not to the federal government, but to you. And they're here for you to participate in managing, and they're here for you to enjoy. And perhaps even more importantly, they're here for future generations as we work to sustain them and conserve them together. These lands offer a lot of really cool amenities. 15,000 miles of trail in Oregon alone, ski resorts and recreation residences, wild and scenic rivers, org camps, resorts and marinas. These are incredibly diverse places that offer all of us the opportunity to get out and enjoy some of the best that our planet has to offer here in Oregon. And these amenities, as Todd had mentioned, they bring a lot of benefits, not just to the individuals who are out restoring heart, mind, and spirit as they recreate, but also to the communities. And boy, howdy, are people out there and enjoying it. This data, you guys, comes from the National Visitor Use Monitoring Program, which is a U.S. Forest Service national program. You'll note these are national numbers. Visitation has been increasing and on an upward trend for some time. And as Lisa mentioned, visitation this particular season, the season that goes on, has been just astronomical. And Cailin, I really appreciate you mentioning that there's some data behind that. We know that we have received unprecedented visitation this spring and summer, and so the trend continues. 9 million visitors prior to the COVID bump, if you will, visiting annually in Oregon, creating jobs, creating income, spending dollars in communities, and generating fees that, where the U.S. Forest Service is concerned, fees that can be used to help improve and maintain the sites that are attracting those visitors so that they are sustainable and the benefits can continue into the future. Just want to speak for a minute, though, about the amenities themselves. And this is an example slide that those of you who may have participated in last year's Outdoor Recreation Summit might remember from a presentation Zach Jarrett gave on the Pacific Northwest Trail Strategy that he and many partners here participating in today's forum are involved in. This slide shows in the line graph visitation to forest, and then in the bar graph, miles of trail. And it's not intended to give us a chance, or it's not intended to cause us to dive deep into why certain forests have certain miles, why certain trails are managed certain ways, but it's meant as an illustration to basically say to you guys, while there are tons of amazing opportunities, there are amazing and incredibly important recreation amenities out on the landscape, there's also misalignment. There is a legacy system of developed recreation and trails that in some cases is not sustainable and is not meeting the needs of present and future generations. And we have an opportunity together to change that. And so, you know, Winston Churchill said, never waste a good crisis. And I believe deeply in that. And I also recognize that some silver linings come with really dark clouds. This year has been, with the unprecedented wildfires, the incredible wind event that led to the unprecedented wildfires, and then of course a global pandemic on the top of that. It's been a dark cloud, but there is a really cool silver lining, and it's validation actually that we together as a community have been on the right track. Todd mentioned the Oregon Trails Fund. This is work that we began together, the U.S. Forest Service, Travel Oregon, and many others, looking at how might we create a fund to help drive positive changes in the portfolio of trails that we have out on the landscape. How might we make them more sustainable and more relevant for present and future generations? The ability to pivot that fund is something I'm really proud of, and the core work behind that fund, the idea that together we can invest in what's important and create the future that we want to see, is a core value that we still hold, and that we'll be together as the community working towards. And then want to just mention that we're also investing in an outdoor recreation planner in concert with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And thanks, Lisa, for your work and partnership on that. This planner will be able to look across boundaries, federal, state, private, local governments and help us to look at what is important, what are the assets and amenities associated with what's important, and how can we make those investments such that we're sustaining what's important going forward. We began that work prior to the massive wildfires in Oregon, and yet the massive wildfires and the silver lining to look across boundaries and reinvest and improve recreation opportunities on the landscape is there, and affirming that our partnership commitment to do that in an all land shared stewardship way is the right path. We also are working and have affirmed the work from the Take Care Out There campaign, another campaign that we were able to pivot in partnership with the communities here today to meet the needs of the present situation. So another very affirming situation that our partnerships are on the right path and they are resilient. And then Todd, I think you mentioned the calls that Cailin O'Brien-Feeney with the Outdoor Rec Office has been holding bi-weekly with all public land managers and private recreation providers in the state of Oregon to talk about working together to manage through these really tough situations and to keep our eyes on the future and how we might collaborate. Again, very reaffirming for the partnerships and relationships that have been built here in Oregon. And so I'll just leave it with that, Cailin, and hand back to you, really focusing on the silver lining and the work that we have together in the future.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Yeah, a couple of themes coming up here. Certainly gratitude on my part for the strength of partnerships this year. I don't know that it would be possible otherwise, because most folks think about going outdoors wanting to picnic or hike to a waterfall or maybe just go to their local park, and they don't typically think of who the land manager is first. Right, and so that's how we're trying to accomplish these shared goals. But I want to turn now sort of for our last retrospective State of the Outdoors virtual update to a man, John Blasher, who runs Metro's Parks and Nature program, or Metro Parks and Nature for Metro. And they're a huge provider of local and some destination recreation opportunities. John, you didn't get the full benefit of hearing everyone else's sort of recap, but hopefully you'll be able to slide right in here and share from your perspective essentially what this year has been like running Metro Park and Nature and serving your customers there. So take it away.
Thanks, Cailin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Blasher. You see him, his pronouns. Sorry I couldn't be here earlier to hear all the great sharing out and work that folks are doing. But I'll take a few moments. For those here listening, just know I don't have any slides. So if you're multitasking, and this is a great time just to sort of listen to a voice rather than having to come back and check on any slides. So I'll just take a few moments to share. Just for context, as a reminder, Metro Parks and Nature, we're part of the regional government Metro here in the Portland area, doing services in Washington County, Multnomah County, and Clackamas County. Our department and work really started about 25, 30 years ago. Actually, even before that with the Green Spaces Master Plan. So in the mid to late 80s, sort of this recognition that the importance of taking care of the land and water and regional trails and that sort of broader regional connectivity is really important to have it coordinated. And so our department spun out of that need and that recognition of opportunities to create that connection and support the long range planning and help support navigating between different jurisdictions, as there's something like 27 jurisdictions over in the Portland metro area that we support. So our department now manages 17,000 acres of parks, trails, and natural areas and historic cemeteries around the Portland metro area. As part of our work too, it's really focused as a unique provider on taking care of protecting and restoring water quality, fish and wildlife habitat while providing access to nature close to home. So continuing this idea of ensuring an equitable green legacy for future generations and having more of a focus on land protection, restoration activities, as well as Cailin mentioned, some of those destination sites or local sites. So working in partnership and collaboration with the other park providers and agencies in the area to create these unique experiences and ones that we either manage or co-manage, as well as creating opportunities to pass along grants and resources and wisdom and knowledge to other providers and learn as well. So like many, the last 7 months have been challenging. I think today is March 232nd or something like that. And we continue to work through the challenges as I would frame them as the three big things we have is the challenge of being responsive, the challenge and opportunity to meet the demand changes, and then that consistent challenge of effective communication internally and externally. On the responsiveness piece, like all of us, like everyone, we're just trying to figure out what's going on and how do you be responsive to staff needs? How do you be responsive to the visitors? How do you be responsive to the virus as it's growing and changing? How do we be responsive to our different contractors and partner needs? And so the first few days of just trying to figure out what do we close down? How do we close it? And the way that we operate our system, we're able to really keep the majority of the spaces open with severely reduced amenities and services. And that required a couple of weeks of really working with staff who were and continue to still be out on the front lines, making sure they have all of the PPE that they need and that we're clear on how to navigate this changing situation. And then the responsiveness that we were getting from some of our community members. As Metro has adopted a strategic plan to advance racial equity and diversity and inclusion, and we've developed a department-specific plan really focused on the outcomes of economic equity, cultural equity, and environmental equity. Some of our partners in these historically marginalized and vulnerable communities were asking, what are we going to do to help be responsive and help potentially mitigate what they see as the other waves of challenges and disasters. So through our grant making and through our contracting, what were creative ways that we could continue to provide services or find ways to remove and reduce the barriers to getting access to the funds or to the resources that we had to help with their work. So that responsiveness was a real challenge. Are we moving fast enough? Are we moving too slow? And it created some good opportunities to rethink how we provide those different services, especially when, you know, in most crises that we're used to experiencing, generally parks and recreation and conservation aren't seen as an essential function, usually in most disasters. And now we're very much at the front of being a very essential service. And how do you navigate what you can provide and can't provide? The second big piece then was the demand changes. And so like you have heard from others, what services are open? How do you manage when folks are potentially coming out and there might not be the restrooms or some of the drinking fountains, some of the things they're used to? What we also saw was a shift in some of the demand of maybe more folks who hadn't come and experienced some of this nature close to home coming out for the first time. And there's so many different agencies and jurisdictions and knowing, well, do I need a pass for this park or for that one? What are the rules here or there? At Metro Parks and Nature facilities, we don't allow pets. And so just trying to work through some of the different visitors that we had while also managing folks that want to run right up to all of our rangers and folks and ask a lot of questions. So navigating those different demand changes. And then the challenge with communication. How do we communicate up to our electeds? How do we communicate out with partners? I think the work that Cailin and Lisa and others mentioned of just bringing folks together and what the Oregon Parks, Recreation and Parks Association of having these regular admin calls and just trying to feed people information and knowledge and get it in timely ways was one of those big challenges. So that's just sort of the overall experience that we've had. We've been fortunate to keep a lot of things open and running, but also as an agency and facing the downturn in our the Oregon Zoo and Convention Center, some of our visitor venues that are not part of our department, but we are part of that agency. We had some economic downturn too, so we also had to do some reductions. we try to absorb as much as possible through the voter approved Parks and Nature bond and Parks and Nature operating levy, which has been a benefit and an opportunity, but then also making sure to follow through on those commitments. The other challenge obviously is just the ongoing crisis and stress of people no longer having some of those creature comforts of being able to connect with each other and talk and passing through the halls or even out in the parks. And so we've just been trying to navigate through all of that and keep things open and try to provide as much of a heads up of when we think we can get back to some of the services they might be used to. In terms of looking forward, it's really continuing to need to lean into the principles that we're adopting around looking at leading with racial equity and those that are most impacted, the most marginalized. How do we make sure to center some of those voices? With the wildfires, there's clearly still the climate crisis that we're experiencing. So how do we make smart decisions now that will hopefully ensure this equitable green legacy that the tribes and indigenous people to this land have stewarded for since time immemorial and will continue to steward. And those are really big, important things for us to look forward. And with that comes not going back to the old normal, but a new normal, because the old normal wasn't working for a lot of people. And we have to be bold and courageous in having these conversations and learning to work together. And it's actually timely that the governor had the task force on the outdoors to really look at bringing people together and creating a potential roadmap of how we can do this work together to make sure that it is truly an equitable experience for folks outdoors. So I could go on, but overall, we've managed as well as possible in the metro area and trying to stay in touch with other park jurisdictions and other communities and partners just to sometimes just be there and try to help make those connections. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Cailin, and thank you all again for having me here today.
Thanks so much, John. We're all going to stay on video now as we transition to a panel discussion or the plenary portion of the afternoon. And I'll just take a moment to remind attendees or encourage participation with questions either for an individual panelist or for the panel as a whole. It could be something that they mentioned you want to circle back to or something that hasn't been discussed yet. And you know, I have a few questions down here that I thought I might get us started with. And one, it actually came up in the earlier afternoon session around how outdoor recreation can serve the social movements of our time. There was this theme of power sharing. And John, just now you mentioned the importance of centering racial equity, bringing in voices into planning and decision making. I wanted to just ask the panel as a whole if, because this very question came up earlier and didn't have a chance to answer it in the earlier afternoon panel, can any of you speak to ways in which you've practiced shared decision making, whether that's in recreation management or in planning and design? Sort of how are we bringing more folks into the conversation, perhaps in particular, folks who traditionally have been marginalized or not directly reached out to. And just a call out here before I ask for anyone to answer, that theme of increasing civic engagement, of diversifying boards and commissions, and of evaluating sort of internal equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts within agencies were all recommendations of the governor's task force on the outdoors as well. I just dropped a link to that report in the chat box. So on that idea of power sharing and shared decision making, the floor is open. I see, Michelle, that you're unmuted, so maybe you want to go, or Todd. If you're unmuted, that means I'm probably going to call on you. So. Michelle, please.
How about I take first bat and you clean up, Todd? Cailin, I really appreciate this question, and the way that it was put earlier in the session before us was, it's one thing to invite folks to a seat at the table, but it's a whole nother thing to empower and enable those folks rearrange the table, to change the paradigm, to be involved in making it their own. And that really is the shared stewardship future that the Forest Service is working towards. We feel very strongly, we know that these lands are owned by the American people, and we know that the American people have a right to participate in their management and to help shape their future. The work is long, and engaging folks and truly sharing power takes time. The first step of that is to build relationships and to build trust. We are working with folks here in this conference, people on the panel, and also people listening, to take that first step, predominantly via our trail strategy, which I mentioned earlier, and I understand there was a little bit of a blip in the slides, and so I'm not sure if folks actually caught that, but the idea is that out on the landscape, we have some, between Oregon and Washington, 24,000 miles of trail designed for users of the first 100 years of the U.S. Forest Service. We're in the second 100 years, and the users of today and tomorrow need to have a voice. And so I'll give a shout out to folks like Steph Knoll here, who've helped bring this conference together, and to Travel Oregon with your community tourism efforts. You guys in partnership have helped us to reach audiences and people that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to reach. And we intend to continue investments in helping to build collaboratives. Also, our work with Oregon Parks and Rec on recreation planning, I think community facing, again, trying to bring not just those voices to the table to work within our paradigm, but to enable folks to truly look and answer the question together: what do we want the future of recreation, and particularly with this effort, the future of trails in Oregon to be?
You know, Cailin, for the sake of brevity, I feel like I should just turn to Michelle and go, yeah, ditto. Everything she said. I will emphasize one, I think, key point, and that is the value of relationship. Being in community with all the communities that make up Oregon and all the communities that make up the visitors that are coming to Oregon. This is a place that I know Travel Oregon has much work to do. I personally have much work to do in this space. So looking at that, two quick examples I will give you of places that we are emphasizing that moving into community. One is when we were considering a campaign like the recent Oregon Only Slightly Exaggerated campaign. We brought together communities of color, you know, to talk to us about the advertising campaign that we were contemplating. We did it early in the process, not at the end of the process to ask folks, what do you think now with what we've done, but rather to start at the onset and say, how do we represent the diversity of Oregon in our advertising campaign? And some of the feedback was beautiful in its simplicity, right? It was like, rather than just showing people of color in the raft on the river, why couldn't there be a person of color who's the guide? Because they're, you know, and to make sure that we're fully reflective of that kind of feedback was invaluable to us. The other that I would just touch on very quickly is, you know, we're in the content development and the content sharing business as well, in terms of driving inspiration for folks to consider Oregon as that destination of choice. And one of the ways we're wanting to make sure we're doing that is by making some seed money available for a grant program so that BIPOC producers, video producers, content producers, or BIPOC stories can be highlighted through these grants. So we're working with the Oregon Film Office and some seed money from us so that we're able to develop that kind of content so that all communities are able to see themselves depicted recreating in the outdoors here in Oregon.
Those are great examples, Todd. And I want to just stay with you for another moment, maybe to ask you to give another, which is, I know Travel Oregon right now is in the process of soliciting input from the community, from stakeholders on a revision, I think that's right, of the agency's strategic plan. And that includes everyone on this call and, thousands of other folks. I'm wondering, has your commission approached that strategic planning process differently? And if so, could you speak to that a little bit?
You're way ahead of me, Cailin. I've got a Post-it note on the bottom of my monitor that says, "Remember to mention the survey." So thank you for the softball on that one. But seriously, the stakeholder survey is one way for our colleagues here in Oregon to share with us their thoughts on how to best move the tourism industry in Oregon forward, their perspectives on the impacts of COVID-19, the wildfires, what we need to think about in terms of our messaging, our development strategies, the priorities that we bring forward as a destination management organization. So the survey is a way to do that. For the first time, we now have the survey in Spanish, not only in English. We're also looking at the entire strategic planning process and looking at listening sessions and focus groups and how some of those could be designed so that we're able to sit down with the communities of color, the various communities that make up the state of Oregon, and hear their perspectives of how Travel Oregon can better represent those perspectives in our tourism development programs, our sales and marketing programs, and across the breadth of everything that we do.
Nice, thanks, and in particular for providing, those really, just discrete examples. We can translate these materials into other native languages. We can hire folks to conduct focus groups. We can pay people for their time to participate in providing that input. Those are just basic tenets that I've learned recently of how to do this work better. So I'm going to move us on. I see one question in the Q&A. Encourage folks to keep that rolling, but I had one other that I just really wanted to key in on, and maybe Todd, it builds off your mention of a next normal, but I'm going to ask it in particular of our land managers that are on the call. And so, we've this year dealt with, as we've talked about, tremendous public interest in the outdoors, which is fantastic. I'm hoping that will continue. We've also dealt with scarcity in terms of resources, staff, and budgets. So thinking about that next normal, because right now there's a necessity to re-examine our work. Are there permanent changes that you expect in how we provide outdoor recreation opportunities to the public? And if so, what are some of those things? What changes that we're seeing this year might be permanent? I'm curious to hear thoughts from John, Michelle, or Lisa. Don't be too bashful.
I was going to say, knowing what's going to be permanent, if 2020 has taught me anything, it's like, if you can plan out more than what the afternoon is going to be, like, good for you. And I think that's probably one of the things, the staying power is understanding how do we have more nimbleness and responsiveness built into systems to be able to react to what's happening, and if possible be proactive, but also know how to be responsive and reactive to what we're managing. And I think also the notion of what are the service levels? That's one of the things that we're working on. And what does that service level look like for folks that go out there? For some people, it's cool if the grass is long. For others, they want the grass short, right? For some, it's like you want to have some more rugged experiences. For others, they're looking for that a different level of comfort. So I think being able to understand that, provide some of those experiences, and then be realistic that some things are going to we have to be prepared for more change, and looking at hopefully not getting to a place of scarcity, because it's so easy to just start looking at reducing things, but rather start looking at the abundance of relationships, the abundance of interest and knowledge and information that's out there that can help us all be smarter. I mean, for us, there was a time where it was like, there's no way we're going to have people teleworking or working remotely. We're government, we sit in our buildings. And then like overnight, it's like, oh, wait, we can do it. And so I think that's part of some of the growing that we'll have to see, and how that gets applied to managing the land and resources and people. And yeah, I think will be important. And then also recognizing, as we look at, other points of view and those that have voiced that have been marginalized, that and I can't remember what one of the speakers this morning said, it's not a natural resource, it's a natural something else. I'm forgetting the term, but just thinking differently about what those, the relationship to the land and to each other has to change.
Cailin, and I would just add to that, Jonathan. I mean, if anybody knows what, Todd used the word normal, and I have a hard time even saying that word anymore, because who knows what is going to come to the future with us. But I think it's, to add on to what Jonathan just said, it's super important for us not to lose the modifications that we've made during this, right? There's a lot of things that we've done that have streamlined things, or that we didn't know were possible. And so I think it's super important not to rush to go back to the way that we always did it. And to Michelle's point, I absolutely love that Churchill quote, because that chaos does create incredible opportunity. And we would be remiss if we don't pause as leaders together and figure out, how do we take on this new journey that we're on, and what it's going to look like. And as Jonathan and many of you have already mentioned, even our work around making sure that we're safer for everyone to be outdoors, and we're creating that access. This is the best opportunity for us to come together, because everything has been flipped upside down this year. So before we become normal again, I think it's super important for us to come together and figure out, what does this really look like for the next 100 years? I mean, this is a critical point in our history where I think we do need to take the time to figure out what do we want it to be, because normal is not acceptable. We can't go back to where we were, and that road has been closed, and it's time for us to embrace where we're heading. So I know Michelle wants to add on to that, so I'm gonna be quiet.
Well, I love the idea that normal is not acceptable anymore, Lisa, because we have learned so much through these trials and tribulations. The connection between federal and state jurisdictions where public land management is concerned is stronger than I have ever seen it. And that is something that I hope we continue permanently, and I know we will continue permanently. The togetherness, I'm going to call it, of the nonprofit and public land management jurisdictions, as well as organizations like Travel Oregon, is nearly unprecedented. I've worked in other areas of the country. I have not seen this kind of partnership before, and it's something that I really hope that we will continue. Campaigns like Take Care Out There, I mentioned, these are campaigns that began before the pandemic, began before the fires. But wow, how affirming that we're on the right path with those types of collaborations. They have just done us all an incredible service. And then a couple of things, I guess I'll say, that I hope we continue to learn from. I'm anticipating that, just like with our management through the COVID situation, unprecedented visitor use will likely continue, and visitors will, I think, likely be displaced to other places unimpacted by fire. That's going to be a learning situation that our partnerships together will help us navigate. And I'm going to say that it's probably going to be a little bit of a wild ride next spring and summer. Some things that I really hope will also not continue, I'll say, is the exhaustion of our larger community, including Forest Service employees. I really appreciate, and hopefully some of them are on the line here to hear me, including volunteers, unpaid staff. I know that you guys have had one heck of a season, and I hope that we are able to find a way to manage through this such that it doesn't rest on your shoulders in the way that it has in in this season. Those are lessons that we'll continue to learn and carry forward.
Cailin, if I could add something real quick.
Yeah,
I've become adept at trying to strike the word normal from my lexicon. In my presentation, I refer to the next normal because I don't think there's going back, and I think that's just kind of where, first of all, I think that's where we're finding ourselves generally, but I also think there's things we don't, as what has been emphasized here by my fellow panelists, things that we don't want to and shouldn't want to go back to. I know prior to COVID-19, we at Travel Oregon were actually within our strategic planning process looking at how are we going to address high use areas. I mean, the lexicon in the global tourism industry was using a word over tourism. But you can look at high use areas and overuse and how we want to manage for that. And there were areas of Oregon that were trying to come to terms with how they were going to manage that kind of visitation. And if COVID-19, and Michelle used the term kind of the silver lining in this, if COVID-19 has afforded the global travel and tourism industry anything, it's been a reset. It's been an opportunity for us to pause and reflect on what the travel and tourism industry was, the importance of that industry, because I think the economy overall is reeling from the lack of visitors, traveling and the economic stimulus that comes as a result of that. But it's also afforded us an opportunity to pause and look at how do we want to come back? What do we want the travel and tourism industry to look like on the other side of COVID-19? Because I believe firmly that if all we do is bring travel back, shame on us. We have missed an opportunity, and it's our opportunity to seize or to squander right now. And I just think right now we should do as my fellow panelists have cautioned, and that is take the opportunity to reflect, to come together as a travel and tourism industry, as an outdoor recreation economy, as leaders in this space, and look at how do we want to talk about high use areas? How do we want to address seasonality? What do we want the travel and tourism industry to look like? How do we best manage this destination, both through our messaging, but also through the products that we develop, how we invest in community and business resources as well?
Let me see if I can segue from that comment, Todd, and thank you for it. I wholeheartedly agree, to a question that's in the Q&A and your background, right? Tumalo Falls, I was there yesterday afternoon. There's a parking lot that's about 20 cars, and there were cars parked at least 3/4 of a mile down the Forest Service access road. Mm-hmm. It was unsafe for my small group on our bicycles trying to navigate around cars. And there's a question in the Q&A around, and I don't know specifically, perhaps the anonymous questioner could add more detail, but reductions in access, on the Willamette and Deschutes National Forest. And so I think we're all kind of there that, yes, we need to rethink things, that equitable access is the #1 goal going forward, that we're not going back. So when you think about overused areas, about perhaps new development, about reduced access in certain areas, how do we actually do that? So as practitioners, right, as professionals, how do you start? What are some of the considerations, and maybe what are some of the considerations that aren't always seen? And I can get us rolling with a couple basic examples, right? So cost is one, impacts to wildlife or to water, other natural resources are others, conflicts between recreation and other uses. Those are just a few, right? So if we get to the point that we're on the same page, that we get good input from the public, how do we operationalize that? It's not an easy question, but I think it's a fair one to ask. And that's open to anyone, even though the questioner did call out the Forest Service in particular, and how does that land agency look at reduction versus increased access? So open floor.
So I'll just jump into those treacherous waters and share that from my perspective, concentrated, heavy recreation use, unsustainable numbers of recreation use in any given site is a reflection of unmet supply, unmet or demand outnumbering supply. And that is part of the conversation that we need to have as a larger community, is where can we bring collectively additional supply to the table, and how can we do that from an all lands perspective, such that the additional supply that may relieve a given Forest Service site may not be even provided necessarily on National Forest System lands, but the U.S. Forest Service would provide support and planning and partnership in order to deliver that more sustainable approach. Similarly, in other areas of the state where our state or local land management partners are experiencing shortages of supply, perhaps we might be able to bring additional supply to the table in order to balance that out. When I think across the landscape at the abundance that Oregon has to offer, I feel very optimistic that we can meet this challenge. What I know, though, is that we're not going to be able to meet it alone or individually in our given jurisdictional silos. We're going to have to break those down. We're going to have to think across the landscape. We're going to have to think in places and in corridors, not in land management, artificial jurisdiction boundaries. And so, I've taken to calling it the recreation shed. Folks here on the line probably have some better terms for that, but in the marketplace where you have not enough supply, demand is going to be overwhelming, and I think that might be what we're experiencing in some places.
Yeah, and Cailin, I'll throw in there, Michelle, I don't know what the right word is, but we've all tried things. We've closed areas, we've tried to do same day reservations, we close and we get capacity, and that's even somewhat of not a real reality. We don't really know what capacity is on necessarily every particular site, and that could alter too. But I think to Michelle's point, it goes back to those community relationships, and I think if we could go back to the beginning of all of this when we closed down and we reopened, and the partnerships about how we nuance that, right? Whether it was closing or reopening. I'm still in every other week calls with the North Coast communities, and it's imperative, and it was really clear that the only way that this was going to work successfully is having all the recreation providers that are on that particular community landscape, business owners, actual citizens who live in those communities that are going to be able to support enforcement. I mean, we have things like state police and local sheriff's offices saying we can't cite for people parking on the highways and in these places because there's no signage or we don't have any ability. And so without that complete conversation to say, yeah, sure, you can open recreation back up, but the community is not ready to serve them. And so you're going to overwhelm a community and a space. And so it may need for us to go a little bit slower in some places to get it right, but this isn't a new conversation, right? This was happening before COVID, whether it was the Gorge or Central Oregon, or pick a spot anymore. And Oregon is bountiful, but to Michelle's point, I think there are some places that are a little more underloved that we could start dispersing folks to if we could get better as recreation providers together with those communities to use our DMO partners and our other partners on the media to start focusing, how do we use a space? Because, going and summiting South Citrus for your first hike probably isn't the thing you need to go do. So there are other ways for us to come together. And I think there's some cool opportunity there too.
And just to tie into that as well, just the governor's task force on the outdoors, that was one of the top recommendations actually in empowering local and statewide action, was to conduct a statewide outdoor recreation inventory and gap analysis. So how do we start looking at what's available, what's possible out there with all the different types and varieties of public lands and spaces, and start to again, create an analysis and be able to start thinking about where could we have some different activities to help disperse, or if we know that there's high use areas, how do you still make sure to protect the resource? And to Lisa's point, you have to maintain those relationships with neighbors.
Yeah, this is, this is a fabulous conversation, because for us at Travel Oregon, and for many of our partners at the local and regional level, those local destination management organizations, as well as those in the 7 tourism regions, this idea of really developing your skill as a destination management organization for decades. They've been, we've all been known as destination marketing organizations. And it really is about how the destination should best be managed. And you've touched on all the aspects. We talk about capacity, you can talk about traffic congestion, you can talk about human capacity, you can talk about the environmental capacity, the supply and demand tension that Michelle alluded to. Here at Travel Oregon, as we talk about our role as a destination management organization, it's bigger than the work that we do in our destination development space, which many of the folks that are probably participating in this particular webinar are familiar with when you think about the rural tourism studios and the food trails and the networks that have been developed around the state, and the incredible Herculean lifts that have been done by the team at Travel Oregon on the destination development front. But the way you market, the messages you put in market, who you market to, the seasons that you market within, the stories that you share in your marketing, for example, those underutilized parts of the state, those underutilized days of the week or times of the day. I mean, there are a lot of ways to look at how we disperse our visitors and help share that economic impact throughout the year and across the state. And that's really part of our role too, when we look at how our sales and marketing efforts are as much a part of how we manage this destination as those boots on the ground product development, community development, business development programs are as well.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. And it's probably the right question to be asking, exactly because it's hard, right? And that it was something we needed to be thinking about before, now, and again into the future, right? It doesn't mean that because it's a thorny issue, it is going away. I'm looking sort of at the time and have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and I just want to ask for sort of quick answers to both of them. One is part educational, part answer back, and it relates to money and some positive news around funding. John, you mentioned Metro's Parks and Nature Bond and operating levy. Michelle and Lisa for the federal and state agencies, and many of the folks that are on this webinar will know this, but the Great American Outdoors Act passed that will increase Land and Water Conservation Fund funding, as well as provide maintenance and backlog dollars to federal agencies. As we have new money coming to the table, I just would give you the floor for a couple sentences about what those programs will mean to Oregon, how you plan to get the word out and get those dollars out to support communities in their rebuilding and recovery efforts, et cetera. So again, happy to start anywhere, but since John, you mentioned it in your presentation, maybe just a quick snippet. What is the Parks and Nature Bond and operating levy? What does that mean for folks who enjoy parks in the metro area? And then we can go around the panel.
Yeah, thanks. You can find information on our website and links to some of the granting programs that we have through the levy, as well as through the bond. Some of the bond programs are still being developed, but the intent is really to help protect and connect nature and people. And so there will be opportunities. Again, the bond is for more capital-driven projects. The levy can be used a little bit more flexible with operating. And to your question before, you talked about like power sharing. I think this is one of those places where power sharing is the most important. And part of the language in the bond specifically talks about meaningful engagement and really creating opportunities for folks to weigh in on the development of the measure, as well as the implementation of it. And so working with advisory committees and really being clear on places where they can help, more voices can help to shape how is this program actually implemented, so that these nature neighborhood grants that we have as part of this program, helping to develop the framework and criteria. And so that really helps to, again, shift that dynamic of power sharing and being able to actually put the constituents and folks into the sitting at the table. And being clear on when it's not just informing or consulting, but actually saying you can drive this. So lots of information on the website. You can look and find and post it in the chat here in a moment. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks. And then Michelle or Lisa speaking to the Great American Outdoors Act, if you would.
Sure. Well, I see Lisa's still on mute.
I figured it should be your good news to share first. I just get to implement. You get to share it.
Well, it comes in two parts. The Land and Water Conservation Fund has been permanently funded through this legislation, and that will have federal and state benefits for generations to come. It's huge. That took a lot of work on the part of a lot of people. The second part, as Cailin mentioned, is funding for the substantial deferred maintenance backlog that exists on federal lands. And so real quick, what I'll share on that piece, and then Lisa, hand it to you, is that we're on a very fast track with fiscal year 21 and 22 projects for the Great American Outdoors Act, as well as for other investment opportunities on the federal side of the house. I am very excited about those opportunities to invest in the most obvious, most well-known places that we all could tick off and say, yes, these corridors and these facilities within these corridors matter, and we need to get them up to snuff. I'm also super interested, and John, thank you for mentioning power sharing. I am really interested in the hard stuff for fiscal year 23 and beyond. What kind of conversations can we have in community to understand how to address the scarcity of supply that we've been talking about, to understand how to address the additional opportunities that might be needed in order to invite and be good hosts to marginalized or currently underserved populations? How can we leverage these dollars together to make sure that we are modernizing, I'm going to call it, our system of recreation amenities across forest system lands, but not just forest system lands, across the all lands landscape, so that users are getting the service and the opportunities that they deserve from this point going forward. So maybe I'll leave it with that, Lisa, in hopes of giving you some time.
Thanks, Michelle. So on our side of it, we administer the Land and Water Conservation Fund on behalf of the federal government through Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And so we're super excited for the funding level that we have this year, and in an unprecedented time, right? Like, so what a courageous level of effort that Gift to Oregon will be with us for generations to come. So we just look forward to partnering at that local and regional level, on the special district levels, where we can talk about things like acquisition and planning and development, and expanding some of these opportunities that we have in communities to be able to get more courageous in these conversations that we're having there. So I know, Cailin, you're pushing for time here, so I'll hand it back.
Oh, thanks. It's great though, because it is a testament to the level of support, the importance of access to the outdoors, even when, or especially when, budget times are tight and the world is on its head. So it's 5. I see participants dropping off, but I did have one final question for everyone and a wrap up. So I'm going to plan to go 5 minutes over. Just that's my PSA, and drop off if you need to, if you're a participant. My question is, I'm going to paint a rosy future where a year from now, we get to have this same conversation together in person, and and report back on a key accomplishment. What is that accomplishment in a sentence? And if you don't want to answer that, option B is, do you have an ask of folks in the audience? How can they help if they care about the outdoors, if they support the stuff that they work on that we've been talking about here, which I would guess folks do if they're spending their late afternoon with us? Is there a direct ask that you have of audience members about how they can help support equitable access, and a strong outdoor recreation economy in Oregon.
Cailin, I'll do both. I'll take, my hope is that a year from now, we will have made substantial progress, if not having had completed a recreation inventory and gap analysis such that we have a shared understanding of what are the most important places to invest in here in Oregon. And my ask for the audience members is to continue to support the multiple nonprofit organizations represented here in this forum that we know are going to be working side by side with us on that work and creating that shared understanding and vision.
I'll jump in. At Travel Oregon, our vision is a better life for all Oregonians through strong, sustainable local communities that welcome a diversity of explorers. Two key words in there, all, in talking about Oregonians, and diversity when talking about explorers. And my heart really is in this space as we talk about DEI, how we make sure that access to the outdoors, the experiences here in Oregon are truly equitable, that all Oregonians and all our visitors do feel welcome and they feel valued. And we've got work to do in that space as an agency. And I'm hoping that a year from now, we're able to sit down and really talk about some progress there. My ask would be, and we've already touched on it, and the link is in the chat. Please fill out that stakeholder survey because it's out there until October 30th. It won't only be used to inform Travel Oregon's strategic plan for the next few years, but our regional destination management organization partners will be using it as well. So again, please fill out that survey. Give us your thoughts and ideas for how you envision the tourism industry being moved forward here in Oregon. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Lisa?
Yeah, so they both stole kind of where I would want to be in a year. But, ideally, I want to be out of this and I want to be where we're heading. But I want to be stronger on the other side of that. So I guess my big ask is, just one, patience as we continue to endure this. We're not out of the pandemic. We're not done dealing with, everything that's still in front of us. We got a pretty heavy winter to get through, and there's still a lot of uncertainty and instability in front of us. But I would continue to encourage you to not let us off the hook here and continue to push on us to come forward, not only for you to support the efforts, but for you to actually start leading the efforts and tell us places. Jonathan used the word earlier, drive, and come show us places where you can drive, because a bunch of us are ready to kind of sit in the back seat and just take in the beauty while you take us on the next level of the journey. So I'll let Jonathan give us some incredible words of inspiration now.
Now you've really hyped it up. I think one thing would be that as we look and talk about racial equity and diversity and inclusion, it doesn't feel like sort of this other task or thing, that it starts to become just part of the regular. Of course, this is how we do it, because we care about the land, we care about water, we care about people, that this is just part of it. And so that those conversations and those muscles begin to get used more frequently, and people see that it does help make all of us better and stronger. The other thing I would hope to see in terms of sort of an accomplishment is real strong coordination, understanding around how we're going to be addressing more of these climate change issues and the climate resilience. Because if there's no land, or if the conditions are too harsh to go outdoors to, then it's going to be difficult to recreate. So how do we continue to bring forward all these great folks and continue to push the idea of equity, diversity, inclusion, as well as the importance for climate resilience, so that we can say, here's more of those roadmaps and how we will continue to make that progress at the local level, at the regional level, at the statewide level, and more. So thank you.
Thank you all for sharing those reflections, the asks of audience members, and sort of with the theme of today, I think it makes sense that there's overlap, right, between the visions of a year from now that you shared. It'd be a surprise to me if that weren't the case. So thank you for your time today. Thanks for letting me lead us on this conversation and letting me learn from you. At this point, this is the close of the 2020 Oregon Outdoor Recreation Summit. I want to again, thank all of our sponsors. I want to thank our fellow organizers, Travel Oregon, the Oregon Trails Coalition, all of our amazing speakers, our over 400 attendees, more folks than last year, for sharing your time with us. And it's really collaborative efforts like this that give me hope, the sharing, the pushing, that'll help us create that better future for outdoor recreation for all Oregonians. And everyone here is a core part of that. So I really, really do sincerely appreciate it. The final bit of sort of note keeping is that you will receive a different survey from the one Todd mentioned, but a post-summit survey in your email box tomorrow morning. Please take that survey so that we can continue to learn and improve, and that all of the sessions from the summit will be available next month, as well as a final version of the 2020 Oregon Outdoor Recreation Economic Impact Study that Todd spoke to today. That is all. Thank you, everyone, and take care out there.
Nice. Bye, guys.